My name is Sofia Moretti. The world believes I died when I was 7 years old. They said it was a fire. They said it was an accident. They printed it in the papers, whispered it at funerals, and moved on like I had never existed. But I remember the truth. I remember smoke choking my throat and heat pressing against me like a wall. I remember screaming for someone to come. And I remember her, Isabella, my stepmother, standing outside the burning house, arms folded. Is cold. She was not trying to save me. She was watching to make sure I died. That was the night she tried to erase me from the Moretti name forever. That was also the night she made the biggest mistake of her life. Because I did not die. I survived. And I remembered every single thing she had done. For 15 years I carried that memory like a blade hidden under my skin. I let the world believe the lie. I let them grieve for a ghost. I let Isabella feel safe and untouchable. Because the most dangerous thing a Moretti can do is let an enemy believe they have already won. She thought she burned away a problem. All she did was turn me into fire. It started long before that night. Long before Isabella. Before I even understood what the Moretti name meant. My father, Alessandro Moretti, was not a man people described with ordinary words. He was the kind of man that rooms went quiet for. The kind whose handshake ended wars and whose anger started them. He ran one of the oldest crime families in Italy. Everything wrapped in shipping companies and construction contracts and expensive suits. But everyone who mattered knew what moved underneath. He came to New York for a deal. A quiet hotel meeting that was supposed to last one night. Did not go quietly. Someone had tipped off a rival. Gunshots tore through the lobby. Glass shattered. Men scattered. My father had already been drugged. Something slipped into his drink at the meeting table. His vision blurred. His body slowed. He could not fight his way out. So he did the one thing a man like Alessandro Moretti almost never did. He ran. That was when he found her. Or rather, that was when he stumbled into the woman who would become my mother. And neither of them had any idea what that collision would eventually produce for the rest of both their lives. Her name was Catherine. She was 24, visiting New York from Ohio, with no connection to his world. She was finishing a late dinner alone when chaos broke out in the hotel lobby. My father grabbed her arm in a dark hallway, pulled her through a service door, and locked them inside a storage room. She should have screamed. Instead she looked at this trembling, clearly drugged stranger and stayed completely calm. She talked him through it, kept his breathing steady, pressed a cold cloth to his neck. When the gunfire stopped and the hotel went silent, she helped him to his feet. He looked at her like she was something he had never encountered before. They did not talk much that night. By morning she was gone. No name, no number. Just the memory of a woman who had been completely unafraid. My father flew back to Italy and told himself it was just one strange night. He was wrong. That one strange night became me. 6 weeks later, my mother discovered she was pregnant and made the decision entirely on her own. She would raise me alone with everything she had, and she would never treat it as a burden. My mother raised me in a small Pittsburgh apartment. She worked 2 jobs, read to me every night, and taught me to be sharp and self-reliant. She never made our life feel like a hardship, never complained, never asked for help. She was the strongest person I have ever known. She told me my father lived far away and could not be with us. I believed her completely. Then when I was 6 she got sick. The doctors used a word I did not understand at the time. Terminal. She had maybe a year left. She spent the first months pretending everything was fine. Then she spent the last months searching for the man from the hotel, the father of her only child. She found a name from a news article. Alessandro Moretti. She understood quickly what he was. But she had no other options and no more time. She found a way to reach him and sent me to him. Not out of abandonment, out of love. She needed to know I would be safe after she was gone. She held me for a long time the morning I left. She said I was the best thing she had ever done. I did not know it would be the last time I saw her. I arrived in Italy on a gray Tuesday morning. 6 years old, holding a blue backpack with a stuffed rabbit inside. A woman from my father's household picked me up without smiling. The car was black and long and silent. The house was more like a fortress. Stone walls, iron gates, gardens too perfect for any child to have ever run through. My father met me in a large room with old paintings and high ceilings. He crouched to my level and said in English, "You have your mother's eyes." Not warm, but honestly. He did not pretend to love me instantly. He took me in because I was his blood, and in his world blood was everything. He gave me a room, clothes, tutors, and his name. What he could not give me was protection from the woman already living in his house. Isabella had been his wife for 3 years. She was beautiful the way expensive things are beautiful. Polished, precise, and cold underneath. She smiled at me on that first day, took my hand, showed me every room. The whole time her eyes were saying something her mouth never would. "You do not belong here." And she was already planning quietly to make absolutely certain of it. Isabella Conti had married my father with one goal, to secure her family's position through the Moretti name. The Contis ran smaller operations in northern Italy, and a connection to the Morettis was the step-up they had wanted for years. She had done everything right. Worn the right dresses. Hosted the right dinners. Smiled at the right men. She had been working on the final step, producing a Moretti heir, when I arrived and complicated everything. I was not supposed to exist. I was proof of a history she could not control. Worse, I was his firstborn. In the Moretti family, the firstborn inherits everything. That had always been the rule. Isabella began her campaign slowly. Small things first, forgetting to tell staff I had not eaten, scheduling my tutors during times I usually spent with my father, whispering to him in the evenings in ways I could feel but not hear. She was patient and clever. Then 2 months after I arrived, she announced she was pregnant. The house shifted immediately. My father smiled more. Everyone focused on her. I was quietly moved further to the side. A different tutor, a different meal schedule, a different part of the house. I watched every move she made and stored everything. One night I got up for water and took a wrong turn. Isabella was on the phone, voice low and clipped. She said 2 things I never forgot. First, the test confirmed it is not his. Second, we just need more time. I stood in the dark, heart pounding. Too young to fully understand. But I stored every word the way my mother had taught me. Observe before you react. A week later, Isabella announced a miscarriage. My father went quiet for days. After that he looked at me like I reminded him of a pain he could not name. She used that grief perfectly. She told his advisor I was troubled. She told the housekeeper I had been stealing. She told my father that perhaps it would be better for everyone if I was raised somewhere quieter and more structured. She never raised her voice or made direct accusations. She planted seeds and let them grow. By the time I was almost 7, the decision was made. I was to be sent to a family home in the countryside. Distant relatives who would raise me quietly, away from the estate, the business, everything that made me a Moretti in any real sense. I was told it would only be temporary. The countryside house belonged to a couple named Marco and Elena. They were genuinely kind. Elena made thick soup and Marco taught me to feed the chickens. For 3 weeks it almost felt safe. Then the men came. It was past midnight. I woke to breaking glass, shouting, then silence, the kind worse than noise. The hallway smelled of smoke. I heard Marco yelling Elena's name, then a crash. I ran to the stairs. 2 men were moving through the lower level. One held a metal fuel container. Marco tried to stop them and they knocked him down hard. I ran back to my room and pushed the window open. There was a roof ledge and a tree close enough to reach. My hands were shaking. Smoke burned my eyes. I looked down at the garden, and I saw her, Isabella, standing at the edge of the property, arms folded, looking up at the burning house. Waiting. Jump. I caught a branch, dropped through the lower limbs, and hit the bushes below hard enough to lose my breath. I lay in the cold grass and listened to the fire. I did not hear Marco or Elena again. I stayed still until a car engine disappeared down the road. Then I got up and walked into the trees. I was found 2 days later by a farmer named Gio, who nearly stepped on me sleeping under a hedge at dawn. I was dehydrated, scratched, and barely speaking. He and his wife Sarah brought me inside and asked nothing for the first day. On the second day, Sarah held my hand and said, "You do not have to tell us anything yet." I told them everything. They listened without interrupting. When I finished, Gio was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You cannot go back." They had no children, and lived on a farm 2 provinces away, with no connection to the Morettis. No one would think to look here. They gave me a new name to use, attached to their surname, so that if anyone came asking, I was their niece from the south. I was given a bedroom overlooking sunflower fields. For the first time since my mother died, I felt something close to safe. Gio had served in the military when he was young. He began teaching me quietly how to move silently, how to read a room before entering it, how to understand a person's intention from the way they stood. Sarah taught me numbers. She had run the farm's finances for 30 years. She said, "Money is just power written in numbers. Learn to read it better than anyone else in the room." By 14 I was fluent in Italian, English and French, reading financial theory on my own at night. By 17 I had a job at a local accounting firm where I quietly outperformed people twice my age. I did not forget who I was or what had been done to me. I was simply becoming the version of myself that could do something about it. At 18 I left the farm, the hardest goodbye of my life. Gio held me at the door without speaking. Sarah pressed a thick envelope into my hands, savings she had built for me over years without ever telling me. I cried for the first 10 minutes of the drive. Then I stopped and focused. I moved to Milan under a clean new identity. Carefully built, legally solid. I enrolled in business and international finance and worked nights at a trading firm to pay for it. Within 2 years I had been offered a junior analyst position that most students spent 5 years chasing. I was relentless. I signed deals senior colleagues hesitated over. I read rooms correctly when no one else could. I let people underestimate me for exactly as long as it was useful. Then I showed them what I was. But Milan was only the first move. The real work had not yet started. At 22 I made my first move against Isabella's world. I spent 6 months studying the Conti family. Their business structure, their debts, their alliances, their pressure points. Their real estate portfolio had one key vulnerability. 3 large properties financed through a single private bank quietly looking to exit those loans. I found the bank, found the right contact, and acquired those loans through a holding company no one could trace back to me. Then I waited. When the Contis missed a refinancing deadline, which I had ensured by engineering a quiet block on their bridge financing through a contract at a rival firm, I called the debt. Their portfolio dropped in value overnight. 2 properties had to be sold at a loss. I did not want to destroy them yet. I wanted them scared and searching for whoever was coming. Let them search. They would not find me. Not until I was ready to be found. The Countess ran to Isabella. Isabella ran to my father. My father hired the best investigators money could buy. One of those investigators was a man I had not planned for, a variable that made everything I had carefully constructed feel suddenly, uncomfortably exposed. His name was Luca Ferraro. 28 years old, former military intelligence, completely loyal to Alessandro Moretti, and sharp in a way I had not anticipated. I first saw him at a business conference in Florence. He was watching for threats to my father. I was there as a financial consultant. Our eyes met across the hall. He crossed to me in 12 seconds and asked questions that were too precise for small talk. I gave him answers that told him nothing while sounding like everything. He laughed once, a real laugh. I walked away with my pulse slightly faster than it should have been. His investigation came close to my holding company, not close enough to identify me but close enough that I had a decision to make. Run the operation from a distance or get closer, use the fact that he was drawn to me and control what he found. I let him find me. Not the real me, the version I had built. The financial consultant with the clean record. I arranged to be at 2 more events he attended. The 3rd time he sat down and said, "I think you already know I have been looking for you." I smiled and said, I think you have been looking for whoever is moving against the Conti portfolio. That is not the same as looking for me. I gave Luca the name on my identity, where I had studied what I had built. All true, all clean. Nothing leading back to Sofia Moretti, who died in a fire at 7. He checked everything. It all verified. He came back and said, I still think you know more than you are showing. I said, most people do. He smiled. Something shifted between us that neither of us had planned. He began to trust me, not with the investigation, he was too careful for that, but with conversations, with time. He showed me who he was underneath the controlled surface, and I began to feel something I had not felt in a long time. Not evaluated, actually seen as a person. Pushed it down. I had a job to finish. But Luca was becoming a complication I was no longer sure I wanted to remove. He eventually concluded the Conti losses were internal mismanagement and closed that inquiry. I had laid enough false trails. The investigation went quiet. But he kept finding reasons to be in the same rooms I was in. Let him. I told myself it was still strategic. I knew even then that it had become something else entirely. I chose to deal with that truth later. First, I had a plan to finish. Isabella's daughter Vittoria was 18 and already positioned as a connector piece, engaged to the son of a powerful Florence family named Nico. He came from money but had one clear weakness. He wanted to prove himself beyond his family name. I made sure he met me at a gallery opening where I was presenting a financial partnership to investors. I treated him like an equal, gave him room to speak, and placed him in a deal that made him look exceptional in front of people who mattered to him. Within 3 months, when I let him understand that the deal was tied to interests conflicting with the Countess, he made his own choice. He ended the engagement. Vittoria reported the humiliation to her mother. Isabella's carefully built alliance crumbled. She was furious and growing suspicious. Meanwhile, I had confirmed what I had suspected about her children. Through a private physician Isabella had used for both Marco and Vittoria, and a DNA comparison against my father's medical records obtained through a trusted source, the results were clear. Neither child was Alessandro Moretti's. The same children she had used to cement her power, built entirely on a lie. I kept that information locked away. It was the last card I intended to play, and I would play it at exactly the right moment. My father noticed me before I intended him to. I was at a private business summit in Rome, presenting a restructuring proposal for a mid-size logistics company that 3 larger firms had already declined. I had spent 6 weeks inside the company as a consultant before writing a single word, learning every inefficiency, every hidden asset. When I finished presenting, the room was completely quiet, the kind that comes just before money moves. Alessandro Moretti was in the back. He came to me during the break and said in Italian, "That was the best proposal I have heard in 4 years." I answered in Italian, then shifted to English, then French within the same sentence. His eyebrow moved slightly. He asked where I had trained. Told him. He asked who my backers were. I gave him names that were true and carefully selected. He handed me his card with 4 words written on the back. "Come see me. We have things to discuss." I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel and my heart running at double its normal speed. He had no idea who he had just invited into his world. He was about to discover that his instinct for talent had led him directly back to the daughter he thought he had buried 15 years ago. I spent a month working alongside my father before he trusted me enough for a real meeting. By then Luca had become a fixed presence in my life. Neither of us named what it was. But we both knew. One evening after a late session at the estate, Luca walked me to my car. He said, "Alessandro trusts you. That is not something he gives easily." I said, "I know." He looked at me carefully. "Who are you?" Not suspicious. Searching, the way someone asks when they genuinely care about the answer. I said, "Someone who has been waiting for the right moment." I drove away before he could ask more. Isabella had already noticed me. I had seen her watching from the second-floor window the day I first arrived. She had made inquiries, she always did. But my identity was clean and my history solid. To her I was simply a sharp new talent her husband had taken an interest in. She could not have placed me yet. But I could see it in how she watched me cross the courtyard. The slight stillness, the narrowed focus. A woman like Isabella did not survive this long without strong instincts. Her instincts were telling her something was wrong. She just could not name what. I needed to move before she figured it out on her terms. The family dinner came on a Thursday evening in November, the first time my father invited me to a Moretti table. Isabella was present. So was her son Marco, 17 and carrying borrowed arrogance. Her daughter Vittoria watched everything with sharp, unhappy eyes. I sat directly across from Isabella. She smiled politely. Smiled back. Over dinner my father raised the restructuring proposal I had drafted, a realignment of Moretti holdings to increase liquid assets and cut exposure in 3 unstable markets. Isabella immediately offered an alternative view, one that conveniently protected her family's remaining interests. My father listened. Then he turned to me. I walked through the numbers without rushing or raising my voice. I showed exactly where the Conti-influenced approach would expose the Moretti portfolio to serious risk, and what the alternative protected. When I finished, the table was quiet. Isabella's expression had not changed, but her right hand, resting on the tablecloth, had closed slowly into a fist. After dinner my father pulled me aside. He said 3 words. "You are exceptional." I thanked him calmly. I drove home and let myself feel that for 10 minutes. Then I got back to work. There was one final move to make, the most important one, and it required perfect timing and a completely steady hand. I sent Isabella a message from a private channel she would not recognize. The message contained one thing, a photograph. Her, standing in a countryside garden 15 years ago, arms folded, looking up at a burning house. I added no words. 20 minutes later she had seen it. 2 days of silence followed. I watched every channel I had access to. She was making calls, pulling records, trying to find where the photograph had come from. She found nothing because I had left nothing to find. On the 3rd day she messaged back. "What do you want?" I wrote, "A conversation. In person. Alone." She agreed. Terrified people always agree to the thing that promises information. We met at a private restaurant booked under a name she did not know. She arrived perfectly dressed and perfectly composed on the surface. She sat across from me and spent 2 full seconds studying my face. I watched it happen in real time. The moment recognition started fighting through 15 years of assumption. The bone structure. Eyes. The exact shade. She went very still. I let the silence hold. Then I said quietly, "You recognize me now, don't you?" Her face lost every trace of color. The woman who had watched a child burn and never lost a night's sleep was finally looking at what she had failed to destroy. "I did not die that night," I told her. Quieter than I had expected. I jumped from the window before the fire reached my room. I landed in the garden. I watched you standing there with your arms folded. I watched you wait. Her hands were flat on the table. She was not going to run. Too proud, too calculating. Already searching for angles. She said carefully. "You were 7 years old. Children misremember." "I have the photograph," I said. "I have financial records showing payments from a Conti family account 3 days before the fire. And I have a witness. A man hired that night, now living in another country, very willing to talk." That was entirely true. He had never made peace with what he had done to a child. She stared at me. I let the silence sit. Then I said, "Your children are not my father's." She stopped breathing for a moment. "I know about the phone call I heard when I was 6. I know you faked the miscarriage to remove me as a threat. I have the DNA results for both Marco and Vittoria." Her chin lifted slightly. Still performing control. She asked, "What do you want?" "I want what was always mine," I said. "The Moretti name. My father's trust. And I want you gone. Quietly. Permanently." with no trail left behind. She spent 3 days looking for a way out that preserved her position. She contacted lawyers. She reached her brother at the Conti security arm, the same people who had arranged the fire 15 years ago. I anticipated every move and had people watching. I let the meeting with her brother happen. I wanted her to feel like she still had options. On the 4th day I sent a second message. It contained the location and signed statement of the surviving witness, the full DNA report, and a note. The note said, "Your brother advised you to fight. He is wrong. If you fight, this becomes a legal proceeding and a public record. Alessandro finds out through a court document, not from you. Your children's paternity becomes public fact. Everything you built collapses openly. Or you walk away. You keep the Conti name. Your children are protected. I will never reveal their paternity. But you are done here. No role. No access. No Moretti name." She called me that evening. Said one word. Fine. I hung up and sat quietly for a few minutes. There was no celebration. Just a deep settling, like something held in tension for 15 years finally releasing. Isabella was finished. Now came the harder part. Telling my father the truth about who I was and everything I had done. I told my father everything on a Sunday morning. Not through lawyers or intermediaries. I sat across from him in his private study. Tall windows, old maps on the walls, and I told him who I was. I showed him my original birth records, which Gio had kept locked away for 15 years. I showed him a photograph of my mother, Catherine, the one she had left in an envelope with Gio and Sarah, addressed to the man from the hotel. My father looked at that photograph for a long time. Then he looked at me. He did not speak for almost 2 minutes. Then he said quietly, "Your mother was Catherine Mills." Not a question. He nodded. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. And Alessandro Moretti was not a man who allowed that easily. He said, "I thought you. I was told it was an accident. I mourned you." "I know," I said. "Isabella made sure of it." I laid out everything. The fire, the hired men, the Conti payments, the witness, the DNA results. He listened without moving. When I finished, he said, "How long have you been working toward this?" "Since I was 7, I told him. He looked at me with something close to awe and said, "You are exactly who you should be." Isabella left the estate 3 weeks later. My father handled the separation quietly and legally, with no public story. The settlement was structured so every payment depended on her continued silence. Her children were told only that the marriage had ended. They were not told about the paternity results. I had kept that promise. They were not their mother's crimes. Luca came to find me the evening Isabella's car drove through the gate for the last time. He stood in the garden where I was watching the lights of the valley below. He said, "I have been putting things together." Turned. "I know," I said. "How long?" he asked. 3 weeks. "The photograph of your mother in your father's private file. You have her mouth exactly." I cross-referenced the dates. He nodded. He looked at me steadily. "Everything, the Conti portfolio, Nico and Vittoria, getting close to Alessandro. It was all your plan." "Yes. You used me," he said. Not accusing. Just naming the truth the way he always did. I met his eyes. "At first," I said. Then something changed. I did not plan for that part. A long moment of quiet. Then, neither did I. He did not leave. He stayed. That was all either of us needed to say. 3 months later I walked into a formal Moretti family meeting as Alessandro's named successor. Not because he had decided it alone, because I had spent 8 weeks preparing a complete forward strategy for the Moretti holdings. A restructured portfolio, 3 new international partnerships, and a clean legal framework protecting the family's legitimate businesses from exposure. The room was full of men who had spent decades in my father's world. They were not going to accept me simply because he said so. They needed to see what I was. So I showed them. I spoke for 90 minutes and answered every hard question directly and without hesitation. When one older advisor pushed back on my age, I walked him through a deal I had closed 6 months prior, one that had returned 4 times its value and that 2 of his own contacts had recommended to him without knowing I was behind it. He went quiet. My father sat at the end of the table and said nothing throughout. When it was over, he looked around the room and said, "Any objections?" There were none. Afterward, alone in the corridor, he put his hand on my shoulder. "Your mother would have been very proud." I pressed my lips together and nodded because I could not trust my voice. I had been waiting 15 years for this. I was done waiting. There was one thing I still had not done. I drove to the farm on a clear winter morning, fields bare and silver with frost. Gio and Sarah were in the kitchen when I knocked. Sarah opened the door and pulled me inside the way she always had, without ceremony. I sat at the same table where she had first given me warm broth when I could barely speak. I told them everything. My father, Isabella, Luca, the meeting, what had come after. Gio listened with his hands folded. When I finished, he looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "We always knew." Sarah brought out biscuits and put the kettle on like the world had not just been reset. She said, "You were always going to do something remarkable. We just did not know what shape it would take." I stayed the whole day. We walked the fields in the afternoon, the same ground where I had hidden as a frightened 7-year-old who had nothing left. Now I had everything. Name, family, a future I had built entirely with my own hands. I owed all of it to 2 people who had simply opened their door for a lost child and never stopped believing she was worth saving. That kind of love does not announce itself. Just stays. My name is Sofia Moretti. I am the heir to one of the most powerful families in Italy, and I earned that title in a way no one expected. Not through inheritance or favor, but through 15 years of cold, careful, relentless work. Isabella thought she had erased me the night she stood in that garden and watched a house burn. She had not erased anything. She had given me something a comfortable life never would. The knowledge that I could survive anything, the discipline that comes from building yourself from nothing, and the patience to wait for the right moment. My father is proud of me in the way that cannot be performed. He says it plainly, and that is how I know he means it. Luca says it differently, in the way he watches me close a deal no one saw coming, genuinely pleased rather than threatened. I have Gio and Sarah, who are family in every way that matters. I have a name that is mine by blood and by right. I have an empire I rebuilt piece by piece from the inside out. They tried to burn me when I was small and had nothing. All they did was make sure I knew exactly what fire felt like, and exactly how to use it. I am Sofia Moretti, and I am home.